Christmas dinner. The scent of honey-glazed ham and rosemary potatoes filled the room. The fireplace crackled softly, and Bing Crosby crooned in the background. It looked like a picture-perfect holiday, until my brother Jason stood up, tapped his glass with a fork and said, "We voted, and we all agree that it's better if you just disappear." Silence. Then laughter. Actual laughter. Mom leaned back in her chair, swirling red wine in her glass like a movie villain, and added with a smirk, "We'd all be better off without you, Kelly." Even Grandma chuckled. I looked around the table. 12 people. 12 faces I had grown up with, shared holidays with, made sacrifices for. And not a single one looked surprised. Not one looked concerned. Jason grinned. That smug little grin he always wore when he thought he'd won something. "We're not saying you should, die or whatever," he added, waving his hand dismissively. "Just disappear. Move away. Stop coming to family things. Let it go." Let it go? Like I was the problem. I sat still, hands in my lap, heart pounding like a drum in my ears. But my face? Calm, cold even, because I'd prepared for this. I'd known it was coming. I reached into my bag and pulled out a simple black folder. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. Just the weight of it hitting the table made everyone stop laughing. "What's that?" Jason asked, his voice tight now. I didn't answer, just slid the folder across the table until it stopped in front of him. "You wanted me gone," I said, finally meeting his eyes. "So here, Merry Christmas." He hesitated, then opened it. The change in his expression was almost too good to be real, like watching a stage actor go from cocky to confused to pale all in 30 seconds. He turned a page, then another. "Is this?" "Yep," I said calmly. "It's all real." Jason's wife leaned over his shoulder, her face twisted. "What the hell is this?" Before anyone else could react, Mom slammed her wine glass down. "Kelly, what did you do?" I smiled. "Nothing, just brought the receipts, literally." They didn't know it yet, but that folder was going to crack their perfect little world wide open. But before I tell you what was inside, before I tell you why Jason screamed and why Mom nearly passed out, I need to tell you how we got here. Because this wasn't about Christmas. This wasn't about one dinner gone wrong. Number this was years in the making. Years of me cleaning up their messes, staying quiet, being the responsible one while they treated me like the family doormat. See, I was never the golden child. Jason was. He could light the house on fire, and Mom would blame the lighter. I, on the other hand, could sneeze too loudly and get accused of ruining dinner. My whole life, I was the one who handled things. Bills, emergencies, bailouts. I was the one who stayed late when Dad got sick, who paid off Grandma's nursing home fees, who helped Jason pay his mortgage 3 times. But in return, snide comments, passive-aggressive digs. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" No thank you cards, no acknowledgement, just expectations. It didn't happen all at once. It started small. One favor here, a few $100 there. Just until next month. We're good for it. But next month never came. And eventually, the guilt trips became routine. "You don't have kids, Kelly. You can afford it. You're so lucky not to have responsibilities. We're a family. Families help each other." But somehow, I was always the only one helping. I lived in a small apartment, worked 60-hour weeks, and drove a car that rattled if I went over 60. Jason drove a Tesla. Mom took 2 cruises a year. And yet, I was the one they pitied. And when I finally started saying no, that's when it shifted. Suddenly, I was difficult, cold, selfish. And now, here we were. Jason standing at the head of the Christmas table like some sort of budget Caesar, announcing my exile like it was a game show decision. We voted. As if I was ever given a chance to speak. But I didn't need a chance. I had the folder. And the folder? That was my vote. This story isn't about revenge. It's about truth. It's about finally seeing things clearly without the fog of guilt or obligation. It's about knowing your worth, even when the people closest to you try to bury it under a pile of tradition, manipulation, and expectations. You don't end up being the family scapegoat overnight. It happens slowly, like a slow leak in a tire. One favor turns into 5. One small loan turns into a financial sinkhole. One dismissive comment becomes the only way people talk to you. And if you're not careful, you wake up one day, surrounded by people who only see you as the help. That was my life. The truth? I didn't mind being the responsible one. At first, I liked having my life in order. I liked being the one people turned to in a crisis because I could fix things. And for years, I told myself that meant something. That it earned me a seat at the table. That maybe one day they'd see me as more than the background character in their chaotic drama. But responsibility in a toxic family is a curse disguised as praise. I was 23 when it started. Dad had lost his job. Something about downsizing, although everyone knew it was because he'd mouthed off to his boss one too many times. Jason, my older brother, had just totaled his second car in under a year. And Mom? She was already 2 months behind on the mortgage, but still managed to book a girl's trip to Cancun. And me? I had just started my first real job. Entry level. Benefits. A paycheck that made me feel like I was finally becoming an adult. I was proud. I was hopeful. I wanted to build something for myself. Instead, I walked into chaos. Just help out for a little while, Mom said one night over the phone. We'll pay you back. You know we're good for it. I wanted to believe her, so I sent money. Not a lot at first. Just enough to help cover groceries, the light bill, a new used car for Jason. That was the first time. It wouldn't be the last. Over the next 5 years, I paid for everything from car insurance to dental work to a private tutor for Jason's son, Tyler. I helped with rent, utilities, even a wedding deposit Jason later forgot to cancel after calling off the engagement. I never complained. Not out loud. I just adjusted, cut back, ate ramen more often than I'd admit, took on freelance projects on weekends, skipped vacations, put off saving for a house. Because they were family. And I thought that's what family did. But they didn't treat me like family. Not really. They treated me like a service. Whenever I visited, I was greeted with half-hearted hugs and backhanded compliments. Wow, look who finally decided to show up. Must be nice to live in a clean apartment with no kids running around. Oh, here comes Miss Fancy Job with her little laptop. I brushed it off at first, laughed along. But over time, it started to sting. Especially when I realized the jokes were always at my expense. The digs were deliberate. And the gratitude? Non-existent. One Christmas, I bought everyone thoughtful gifts. Jason a smartwatch, Mom a spa package, even Grandma a heated blanket because she always complained about the draft. You know what I got? A pair of socks from a dollar store. Still had the sticker on them. And when I raised an eyebrow, Mom said, "Oh, you don't need anything. You already have everything." Like I was selfish for having stability. It was around that time I started keeping track. Not just emotionally, but literally. Spreadsheets, bank transfers, emails, texts. Can you help with? And we just need a little. Because something in me shifted that year. Maybe it was the way Jason rolled his eyes when I said no for the first time. Maybe it was Mom's voice turning cold the moment I hesitated. Or maybe it was just the quiet realization that my worth in this family had been boiled down to what I could give. Not who I was. And when I finally stopped giving, they started treating me like I was the problem. Suddenly, family dinners were being held without me. Phone calls went unanswered. I was left off the group texts. I became the villain in a story I didn't even realize they were writing. But here's the thing they didn't count on. I was watching, listening, documenting. Not for revenge, but because I needed to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that it really was as one-sided as it felt. that I wasn't just imagining the imbalance. And eventually, that folder started taking shape. At first, it was just a few receipts, a few email chains. But the more I looked, the more I found. The timeline was brutal. 5 years, tens of thousands of dollars, and not a single cent repaid. Not one. And it wasn't just about money. It was the entitlement, the lies, the manipulation, the twisted belief that because I didn't have a husband or kids, I didn't have a life, that I owed them mine. So by the time Christmas rolled around and Jason stood up with that smug little smirk to deliver his "we voted" speech, I wasn't surprised. I was ready. And that folder? That was 5 years of truth, bound in black cardstock. But they didn't know that yet. Jason flipped open the folder with the cocky confidence of someone who thought they were in control. You could almost hear his smirk in the way he said, "What's this supposed to be, your diary?" But the second he turned to the first page, that smirk vanished. His eyebrows furrowed. He blinked once, then again. By the time he reached page 3, he stopped flipping. He just stared. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. I leaned back in my chair and took a slow sip of wine. "Documentation," I said. "Every loan, every payment, every receipt. Since 2017, Jason's wife leaned over to see. This can't be real." Jason didn't answer. His face had gone pale, like someone had sucked the air out of his lungs. Mom reached across the table and pulled the folder toward her. "Kelly, what are you doing?" "I'm just reminding everyone," I said, "who's been holding this family together." She flipped through the folder. Bank statements, screenshots of texts, email threads, a full spreadsheet, color-coded, dated, annotated. $1,200 for Jason's second car down payment. $3,600 to cover the mortgage for 3 months when Dad lost his job. $5,000 for Mom's property tax bill, paid the same month she went to Vegas with her friends. $800 to help Jason's son get into a summer program, followed by a text message saying, "Don't worry, you're good for it." And that was just the first section. Jason tried to speak, but only managed a stammered, "You kept records?" "Of course I did," I said calmly. I had to. Otherwise, it would have all disappeared, like it never happened. Mom's hand was trembling now as she held the page. "This is twisted," she whispered. "No," I said. "What's twisted is asking your daughter for money to fix your roof and then posting pictures from a beach resort 3 days later." Jason's wife looked up sharply. "Wait, that was the money you used? You told me it came from your tax refund." Jason shot her a glare. Dad hadn't said a word since the folder came out. He just sat there, face blank, staring into the middle distance like he was watching a train wreck and couldn't look away. I turned to him. "You knew?" I said. "You saw what they were doing to me, and you let it happen." Still, he said nothing. "This isn't just about money," I added. "It's about respect. About how, for years, I was treated like the family's emergency fund, therapist, and emotional punching bag. And the one time I said no, suddenly I was the bad guy." Mom slammed the folder shut. "This is completely inappropriate. You're making a scene." "No," I said, my voice sharp. "Jason made a scene when he stood up and said I should disappear. I'm just telling the truth." Jason stood up now, shoulders tense. "You think this proves something? That we're bad people?" I stood too, finally matching him eye to eye. "I think it proves that you never saw me as a sister, just a resource." "You could have said no," Mom said, arms crossed. "No one forced you to help." "I did say no," I shot back. "And look what happened. You iced me out. You voted me out." Grandma, who had been mostly silent, finally spoke. "This isn't the time or place for this." I turned to her slowly. "Actually," I said, "it's the perfect time. Because for once, you're all in the same room. For once, you're all forced to see it. No pretending, No selective memory, just facts. Jason picked the folder back up, his fingers flipping faster now. This doesn't prove anything except that you're obsessive. No, I said quietly. It proves that you were all fine with using me, until I stopped letting you. Then came the breaking point. Page 23. Jason paused. What's this? He muttered. His eyes darted back and forth. His mouth opened slightly. What is it? Mom asked. Jason didn't answer, so I did. It's the credit card statement showing Jason booked a suite at a luxury hotel in Miami the same weekend he told you guys he was working late to catch up on bills. Jason's wife froze. Wait, that was our anniversary weekend. You said, I was, Jason blurted. I mean, I was working. She wasn't with you, was she? I asked. Jason looked at me like he wanted to throw something, but he didn't deny it. His wife stood up and grabbed her purse. We're done. Jason tried to follow her, but she was already out the door. The room was silent again, except for Mom. She whispered, You ruined Christmas. I looked at her, really looked at her, and then I said, calm as ever, no. I just stopped pretending. Silence hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The folder lay closed on the table, its contents like a ticking time bomb that had just detonated. Jason's wife had stormed out, her departure leaving a void that seemed to echo louder than any words spoken. Mom sat rigidly, her hands clenched into fists on her lap, knuckles white. Dad stared at his plate, as if the mashed potatoes held answers to questions he couldn't voice. Grandma's eyes darted between us, confusion etched deep into her wrinkled features. I broke the silence. This isn't about revenge, I said, my voice steady. It's about accountability. Mom scoffed, a bitter sound. Accountability? For what? Helping your family? I met her gaze. Helping is one thing, being exploited is another. Jason finally spoke, his voice low and defensive. You could have said no. I did, I replied. And look where that got me. Grandma leaned forward, her voice trembling. Kelly, dear, families have ups and downs. We argue, we make mistakes, but we come together in the end. I sighed, the weight of years pressing down on me. This isn't a simple argument, Grandma. It's a pattern. A cycle of taking without giving, of expecting without appreciating. Dad finally looked up, his eyes tired. Maybe we did rely on you too much, but we were struggling. And I understand that, I said. But struggling doesn't justify manipulation. It doesn't excuse treating me like a bank account with no feelings. Mom's voice rose, sharp and accusatory. So this is your solution? Airing our dirty laundry at Christmas dinner? I stood, the chair scraping against the floor. No, this is me setting boundaries. This is me saying enough. Jason's face twisted in anger. You're blowing this out of proportion. Am I? I asked, pulling out another envelope from my bag. This contains the legal documents revoking my financial responsibilities to this family. Power of attorney, emergency contacts, all of it. Effective immediately. Mom's mouth opened, then closed, speechless. Dad looked away, shame flickering across his face. I won't be manipulated anymore, I continued. I won't be guilted into sacrificing my well-being for people who only see me as a means to an end. Grandma reached out, her hand trembling. Please, Kelly, don't do this. I gently stepped back. I have to, for my own peace. With that, I turned and walked out, leaving behind the stunned silence, the cold food, and the remnants of a family that had long since stopped being one. When I stepped outside that night, the cold hit me like a wall. But it wasn't bitter anymore. It was clean, crisp, like the air had finally cleared after years of holding my breath. I didn't go back to my apartment right away. I drove aimlessly for a while. No destination, just silence and headlights and the hum of tires on wet asphalt. Eventually, I parked near the lake. The one Dad used to take me to when I was little, before everything got complicated. The water was still, black as ink. I sat there for a long time, engine off, fingers curled around the steering wheel, the folder still in the passenger seat. The same one that had cracked my family wide open just hours earlier. I should have felt triumphant, victorious. But instead I just felt empty. Not regretful, not angry, just hollow. Because even when you prepare for something like that, even when you know in your bones it's the right thing to do, there's still grief. Grief for the version of your family you kept trying to believe in, the version that never really existed. The next day was quiet. So was the day after that. No calls, no texts, not even one of those passive-aggressive, just checking in messages my mom was famous for. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence. I didn't reach out to explain myself. I didn't send a follow-up email or a voice note or a long-winded apology. I let the silence stretch. And it was beautiful. I brewed coffee slowly that morning, ate breakfast without my phone next to me. I opened the windows and let the cold air in. For once, I wasn't waiting for the next crisis. I wasn't checking my bank app to see what damage had been done overnight. I wasn't walking on eggshells. I just existed. I started doing small things for myself, things I hadn't made time for in years. I rejoined the gym I'd canceled 3 years ago to help Jason pay his electric bill. I made a dentist appointment. I went to the bookstore and wandered through the aisles without checking the price of every paperback. I started therapy. Not because I felt broken, but because I didn't want to become bitter. Because I didn't want to walk around with a hardened shell for the rest of my life. I wanted to understand what made me believe I owed everyone everything. Why it took so long to say no. Why it felt like betrayal to choose myself. And slowly, things began to shift. I stopped apologizing when I wasn't at fault. I stopped over-explaining my boundaries. I stopped letting guilt sit at the head of the table in my life. About a week after Christmas, I got my first message. It was from Jason. "You made your point. Now undo the damage. Mom hasn't stopped crying. Dad's blood pressure is up. You really want that on your conscience?" I stared at it for a while, then deleted it without replying. 2 days later, another text. This time from Mom. "It's time to move on. We were all emotional. But family is family. We can't just erase each other." No apology. No ownership. Just expectations. Again, like the last 15 years hadn't happened. And again, I said nothing. I changed my emergency contacts. I froze the joint savings account they'd somehow still had access to. I set up mail forwarding and started looking at apartments in another city, one I'd always dreamed of living in but never dared to pursue because I felt tethered. Not anymore. I began to rebuild a life where I wasn't defined by what I gave up for others. I went out with friends I hadn't seen in ages. Friends I'd distanced myself from because I was always too busy with family emergencies. They welcomed me back like I'd never left. I laughed. Genuinely laughed. I posted a photo of us at dinner on Instagram. No captions, just smiles. And that's when the flood began. First Laura, my cousin, who had clapped when Jason voted me out. "I didn't know you paid for my tuition. I thought it came from your parents. I'm sorry, truly." Then Jason's wife, now ex-wife. "He lied to me. For years. Thank you for showing me the truth. I filed the divorce papers. You did the right thing." And the wildest message of all? A DM from someone I hadn't spoken to since college. "I saw your story. Just wanted to say, proud of you. That couldn't have been easy." That one hit me harder than all the others, because they were right. It wasn't easy. It was brutal, but necessary. And with every sunrise, every new routine, every breath that didn't carry the weight of someone else's expectations, I realized something. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. The beginning of a life where peace wasn't a reward I had to earn. Where love didn't come with conditions. Where I could be generous without being used. The next chapter of my life? I was finally writing it for me. It took 3 weeks of silence before the final attempt came. A letter, handwritten. No return address, but I knew that handwriting like I knew the sound of my own name. It was from Mom. 3 pages, front and back. The first page was full of carefully chosen words, remorseful but never quite apologetic. She wrote about how things got out of hand at Christmas, how Jason had let his emotions get the best of him, how I was always the strong one, and how she just assumed I could handle more. The second page shifted. The tone changed. It turned to guilt. How Dad wasn't sleeping, how Grandma had been asking about me daily, how Ellie, Jason's daughter, kept saying Christmas felt weird this year. And the third page? The third page was the hook. They were behind on their mortgage. Dad's medication wasn't covered. Jason's ex-wife was demanding spousal support. They just needed a little help to get through this rough patch. Just one more time, she wrote. We'll never ask again. I read it all twice. Then I folded it neatly and dropped it in the trash. Not out of spite, but because I had finally, truly understood. They didn't miss me. They missed what I gave them. Access, dependability, a steady backup plan with a pulse. It wasn't love. It was utility. And I'm not a utility. The truth hit hard that night, but not like it used to. There were no tears, no pacing around the room, no second-guessing whether I had gone too far. Just a quiet calm, the kind that comes after a long storm. I poured a glass of wine, sat by my small fireplace, and thought back to that night. Christmas dinner, the moment Jason stood up and said I should disappear. The irony is, I did. Just not in the way they hoped. I disappeared from their narrative, from the role they'd written me into years ago. The reliable one, the financially stable one, the childless one who could afford to give. I walked off their stage, left the script in flames, and they had no understudy. A week later, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it ring out. No voicemail. Then came a text. Please, Dad's in the hospital. I thought you'd want to know. Jason. He didn't say what happened. He didn't apologize. He just used the one card he thought I couldn't ignore. And I didn't. I sat with it. I let myself feel it. And then I decided something important. I wasn't going to let biology override boundaries. If Dad wanted me there, he could have picked up a phone himself. If Mom had meant what she wrote, she would have started with, I'm sorry, not we need. Instead of replying, I called the hospital myself, asked for the floor nurse, confirmed he was stable. And that was enough. I no longer needed to show up to prove I cared. I could care without sacrificing myself. They hated my silence more than any speech I could have given. A few days later, I accepted a job in another city. Bigger salary, better hours, and more importantly, a fresh start. I packed up my apartment, donated what I didn't need, and said goodbye to the life that had always kept me just close enough to be used. The move wasn't sad. It was freeing. I got a new number. I blocked the old ones. I started going to local events, made new friends. Ones who didn't expect anything from me except authenticity. I even adopted a dog from the shelter. His name's Milo. He doesn't care about my past, just that I come home. One night, sitting on my new balcony with Milo curled up at my feet, a friend asked, Do you ever think they'll change? I looked out at the city lights and said, I don't know. But that's not my responsibility anymore. She nodded. Do you miss them? I thought about it. About the moments that could have been, not the ones that were. Sometimes, I said, but I miss the idea of them more than the reality. And that's the truth. You don't walk away from a family like mine without scars, but you also don't heal by staying. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop bleeding for people who never even noticed you were cut. So here I am. No more folders, no more spreadsheets. No more trying to earn a seat at a table that was always rigged against me. I have peace now. Not because everything is perfect, but because I finally chose myself. Because I stopped waiting for them to become the people I needed, and became that person for myself. And if anyone out there's listening, someone sitting quietly in the back of the room, feeling like the outsider in their own family, I want you to hear this. You're not wrong for walking away. You're not selfish for setting boundaries. You're not heartless for choosing peace over obligation. You're just done. And that's okay. Because sometimes the best revenge is healing. And living well? That's the loudest silence they'll ever hear.